Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSP Magazine. You're listening to a new episode of LavaCom, where we gather and share expert insights on security program management delivered with, by, and for the most respected security leaders around the world. Together, we'll explore solutions to the most pressing business challenges unique to the careers of CISOs and cybersecurity executives. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
And here we are. This is Sean Martin. You are very welcome to a new episode of the Blue Lava Community podcast and webcast series. And this is all about helping security leaders achieve greatness, not just for their own programs, but for the business. And that is through education and mentoring and information sharing and collaboration with, by, and for the CISO and security leader community. And I'm thrilled to have one of those members, a founding member of the Blue Lava community, Brian Contos on. Thanks, Brian, for joining us.
Thank you, Sean. Hello, everybody.
This is a super cool thing to be part of, and I'm thrilled to talk to you today. We're going to be looking at the world of IoT security, and we may cross over into industrial control systems. We'll see where this goes. A big space, a space that's growing quite a bit, and not an area that's managed traditionally like the rest of the organization has been. So we're going to get into a lot of that today, Brian. But before we do that, for those that don't know who Brian is, maybe a few words on your path into your current role and why this topic is important to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So my current role is I'm the Chief Security Officer for Phosphorous Cybersecurity. Phosphorous is an IoT, enterprise IoT security company. And my path actually followed a pretty interesting route, I suppose. So I started off in DISA, the Defense Information Systems Agency, down in Fort Huachuca in the Cyber Warfare Group in Arizona, and did that for a while. And then I decided I wanted to get as far away from the United States as I possibly could. So I moved to Sao Paulo, Brazil, and took a job with Bell Labs. In both cases, working in security, mostly network security and system security. And then I got the startup bug. I helped build a company with Amit Yaron and Grant Geyer and Tim Belcher and Lod Yaron and some other really brilliant people called RipTech, which was an MSSP. So we basically took everything that I was doing and said, hey, how can we do this in a remote management fashion and help people monitor their environments? And we eventually sold that to Symantec. But by that point, I had been bitten by the startup bug and went to a very small company that was actually in the back of a dentist office, essentially in Sunnyvale, called ArcSight, just a handful of people. So I had a front row seat to the birth and growth of the SIM space, which was a really fascinating time. From there, I went on to Imperva, and I ran emerging markets for McAfee for a couple of years, working mostly in Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, Latin America, a little bit in the Middle East. And then from after we sold that to Intel, did Solera Networks, sold that off to Blue Coat, joined a couple boards, Cylance, Jask, Aptome, and a couple others, and then wrote some books, took some time off, and then went to a company called Veridon. And Veridon focused on really testing and validating people's security controls and determining, are their tools actually effective? So instead of selling yet another security tool, it's making sure people are getting value out of what they had. And we eventually sold that to Mandiant, which then in turn sold to Google. And now I'm here at Phosphorous. I'm 2 IPOs and 8 acquisitions later, or as my wife likes to remind me, about 5 pounds per company later. Here I am, and it's been a great ride because in many of these companies, I was the CSO or CISO almost always customer facing, out in the field. Before COVID, I was traveling, 200, 300,000 miles a year. Then that dropped pretty quickly, pretty substantially. But I've had the great opportunity and fortune to not just work with brilliant people in these companies, but also all the disparate customers and all the CISOs around the world, and really kind of understand their struggles and what they've been going through. So it's been a great 25 years.
And I didn't follow the same path, but I had earlier days at Symantec, but I was part of the team that worked. I'm trying to think if we actually crossed paths, but the RipTech acquisition at Symantec.
Yeah, well, it was RipTech, it was At Stake, and a couple other folks, kind of all at like a buying spree.
Exactly. And I was building the Symantec SIM at that time.
Oh, fantastic!
And I'm sure we crossed paths at ArcSight for other reasons after I left Symantec. But I guess that one is, it's great to see people grow and succeed, and you probably have taken a lot of what you've learned. And the reason I'm bringing up the SIM is there's probably a lot from that experience that you've carried through in terms of visibility and connection, and trying to bring context, and ultimately bringing some response capabilities to this. Maybe, and I know we're talking IoT, but maybe speak a little to that, and maybe how you've carried some of that through.
Yeah, well, SIM really helped me move from ROSI, or return on security investment, also known as mitigating risk or assurance, to ROI. How can we actually get return on investment from our security devices? This was, if we think back to the heyday of SIM, you had so many disparate devices that maybe you're getting value from, maybe you weren't. It wasn't really clear. You had to cross over from network operations and security operations and system administration and web application security and all these different parts. And in some cases, I was even getting into physical security and IoT devices towards when it got a little bit more mature. But in each one of these departments, it was very clear that people, if they were lucky, they were maybe getting 25, 35% value from their security investments. And it wasn't really clear that they could even measure operational effectiveness and efficiency. Are they doing better this month than they were doing last month or last year? Did this new product actually make them more secure? And that was one of the first times where I said, it's not just about stopping bad things. CISOs are really strategically part of the business, and they have to make key business decisions that are impactful to the broader organization, certainly well beyond security and well beyond IT. And I think one of the customers that I was working with where it really resonated was it was a healthcare provider. And SIM was very common across healthcare providers, payers, and sciences such as pharmaceuticals. But providers were unique in that often targeted. They have relatively small security staffs. I would probably say somewhere along in par with what retail usually goes, which is really razor thin, not like financial services or government or some other groups that have pretty large investments in that area. And the reason for that, and there's many reasons, but one of the reasons is many hospitals actually start off at a deficit because they're not allowed to refuse care. So if somebody comes in, they've been shot or hit by a car, some type of medical issue, they can't just say, go away. Right? We wouldn't want that to happen. So there's already a bit of a loss. And in some cases, that's 25, 30% in the hole. So the margins are very thin, right? Very, very thin, kind of like a supermarket, very, very thin. So what they were saying is, look, for every dollar we're spending on SIM or some security technology or, a new, security analyst to work here, that's a dollar that we can't spend on a new MRI machine or another doctor or a nurse or a PA or some other person that's going to help with the quality of customer care. Now, not to say that security is not part of that. We want to protect the customer data. We want to make sure those machines stay available, that they're not locked up via ransomware, and a million other cybersecurity reasons. But on the front line, it's, hey, are we able to get the patients treated properly and quickly and provide them the level of care they need? And security kind of chips away on that. So some of the CISOs that I was working with early on in this particular hospital that I'm thinking of right now, they're saying, I need to be able to show value, how I'm delivering value to the organization above and beyond just stopping bad things from happening. I go, wow, security is really being treated strategically in this organization. It's, we always talk about having a seat at the table, right? Well, this CISO had a seat at the table. And because of that, they had to justify their spend. They had to show how this is impacting the business mission. And that was probably the first time that I had seen it done at such a large scale, where there was so much pressure on the CISO to prove pretty much on a weekly basis why they are needed. And in our case, at that point with ArcSight, that was helping them actually show that value through their SIEM solution and how all their tools could be brought together and really help them be more efficient and more effective, thus making the hospital more efficient, more effective.
Yeah, and I'm sure people listening I hear the word justify and prove, and when you're not helping to grow the business, but you're having to show why your investments aren't distracting from the business, it becomes challenging and kind of on your back on your heels a bit, I guess, as a CISO. And in the conversations I have, I always try to figure out, is there a way to change the viewpoint or the conversation to be more strategic? If you're not just about mitigating risk and protecting information and systems, but actually, here's how you can architect the business. Here's how you can define business processes. Here's how you can leverage technology. We were having a conversation with Mark Weatherford, and we were talking about the supply chain and the complexities there, and spinning up services and buying products, and this complexity and all that adds to the challenge of actually helping the business grow. And if you can actually have a clear vision of what you want to accomplish, how you accomplish it, consolidate some of those things, maintain resiliency and reliability in the process, you're in better shape. So I guess my rant's done there. Let's get into the IoT world here, because and maybe a definition first off, because in different industries, different sectors, it might look different. Maybe it's the same. But what is IoT versus ICS versus OT versus IT? Does it look different in a hospital? You mentioned retail. I'm thinking some really cool things happening in retail, right? Contactless checkout and things like that. So describe the world of IoT in relation to everything else, and maybe a few examples where it might be different in different sectors.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because I speak to people all over the world about this, literally, and the definition of IoT, I don't think I've ever heard the same one twice. But if I boil it down to sort of the essence of what makes up an IoT device, generally speaking, it's a purpose-built device with some type of embedded firmware, which is usually Android or a flavor of Linux, BSD, especially on the network side, that disallows the installation of some type of endpoint security tool, some type of EDR, some type of antivirus solution, et cetera. So there's these locked devices. Now, across that category, it's very broad, right? So we've got IoT devices that we all think of, like printers and KVM switches and racks and voice over IP phones, audio video equipment, et cetera. Those are all kind of mainstay enterprise security stuff. And then there's some stuff that's on the fringe of that, like gunshot detection equipment that they have, which I had never even heard of before, but they are deployed often on like university campuses. And if it senses a gunshot, they can, one, detect it, and two, help triangulate perhaps where that came from. And then we think of satellites, and we think of automobiles and pacemakers and all these devices that are, they're firmware, they're network connected, they're purpose built. You can't really update them or change them. And then that brings us into sort of the OT world, industrial control systems and PLCs and all the SCADA equipment out there, things that are controlling voltage and pressure and volume and temperature and everything in between, digital assets that are controlling physics, essentially. And then the third category of that, so traditional IoT, the OT world, and that's the network devices. It's the wireless access points, the SANs, the NAS. It's the layer 2 and layer 3 switches. Those all fall into that category as well. And interestingly enough, when we look at it from the side of the attackers, We're seeing more and more breaches now focused on going after these IoT, these network devices, and these OT devices for a very specific reason. One, people have a lot of them for sure, but they're also highly vulnerable, and no one's really managing them. So instead of pounding your head against the front door on the firewall or trying to find some other way to compromise the network, they said let's either go in through these IoT devices, or let's compromise through a traditional route like a phishing attack and get onto someone's laptop. Then let's move laterally and hang out on the IoT devices, install our tools, and use that to scan the network, sniff traffic, enumerate administrative groups, all these other things, because there I can maintain persistence and I can evade detection. So it's really a perfect storm, because the devices themselves can be attacked. I could attack a video camera, and I could use that camera to spy on you with both audio and video. I could unlock doors. I could shut down a UPS system. I can access your critical data through access to a KVM switch or lights out management. So there's all that. Then there's the ability to do things like cryptojacking. I'm going to use all 10,000 of your video cameras to mine cryptocurrency because you're not paying attention, because you're vulnerable, and you probably won't know until you get your power bill, because it's going to make your power bill go through the roof in these cases. But the one that's really getting people, that I think is really starting to make organizations perk up and say, wow, this is a big problem, is the compromise of IoT devices, not as an end result, not to use as part of a botnet, not to use for ransomware, but to move laterally and attack your IT assets and attack your cloud assets. And we're seeing that. In fact, Mandiant just released a report called Quiet Exit, where the attackers did just that. They attacked network devices, such as routers and switches and wireless access points, IoT devices like phones and printers and cameras. They use that as a way to stay persistent and evade detection because no one's looking. And then they started making API calls to local Microsoft Exchange servers, as well as 365 in the cloud. And they extracted massive amounts of email and sensitive data. And in some cases, this lasted for over 18 months. So the bad guys know it. The good guys are starting to pay attention to it. And they're saying, wow, this is a big problem. This is having a direct impact on my IoT assets, my OT assets, my network assets, as well as my IT and my cloud-based assets. So it's a big problem, and the bad guys know it, and luckily the good guys are starting to figure it out.
Well, let's talk about that difference there. And I know we talk about cybercrime as an organized business, and they certainly collaborate and share information and use share tools and things like that. That doesn't mean they have a network admin team and an endpoint admin team and a security ops team and a dev ops team and a DevSec ops team. That's not how they look at the world. They see, well, I want to get your thoughts on this, but I think they see an entity that's exposed, right? Or a sector that's exposed, or a set of things that have vulnerabilities that they can go after. They don't care if there's a network admin or an IT or an OT admin. Yeah. And I'm just wondering if that's our current downfall, to where we're not looking at some of these things across the board like the cyber criminals do.
A lot of finger pointing, right? So I'll use a quick analogy on the SIM side. So when I was with ArcSight, I co-authored a book with the former deputy director of the NSA, Bill Kroll. Brilliant man. And the book was called Physical and Logical Security Convergence. And it was about correlating all the physical security controls with the network access controls to say somebody walked into a building in London, England, but at the same time, they're trying to VPN from Palo Alto, California. It doesn't pass the DUD test. Very, very basic rudimentary takes on that notion. What I find in the sort of IoT world, let's just take video surveillance cameras. When you go into an organization, first of all, people don't know what they have. There's very, very poor discovery and asset management as it relates to IoT. So on average, what we found at Phosphorous is...
Can I pause you, Brian? Why is that? Are they on different networks? Are they? What's the reason for that?
The basic answer for that is the way that traditional legacy scanners, NBAD solutions that try to do asset discovery and traditional asset device discovery solutions work. They're so geared to focus on IT that the IoT devices, they can potentially knock over and break. OT, their approach just doesn't work at all, so you can't use it in that regard. But for IoT, they can knock them over. And when they do discover anything, it doesn't give you the detail that you would need to do anything. It might tell you it's a printer, but I might be a hotel chain and I've got 50,000 printers. And just telling me a printer doesn't really do anything. I really need to get down to the details. So the old legacy approaches to IoT discovery or just discovery of assets doesn't really work well in IoT. So that's a big flaw right there. They just don't know what they have. I've even seen groups that have these cesium atomic clocks, these really, really expensive clocks they use for like stock trading. And if you buy or sell a stock and you have a 1 or 2 millisecond advantage over me, we all know that can be a big monetary difference. So these are really expensive clocks. They thought they had 6 of them. And when we went in to work with them, within a couple hours, we found out you actually have 15 of these. And these are $100,000+ clocks, essentially. and they didn't even know more than half of them. They had no idea. So just understanding. And here's another funny tidbit. On average, and this number blew my hair back the first time I heard it, most organizations have about 3 to 5 IoT devices per employee. So 10,000 person corporation, somewhere between 30 and 50,000. Now, with that said, sometimes like law firms, for example, they're going to have a little bit less. Batch and discrete manufacturing, they're going to have a little bit more. But on average, 3 to 5 per employee. And the other funny part of that is when we go into an organization, we say, take a guess. What's your assumption about how many IoT devices that you think you have? Almost every single time we do it, they're off by 40 to 60% in terms of what their guess, because there's so many connected devices that they go, oh, I didn't even think of all the physical biometrics door access points or all the little lights out management switches that are in the back of my servers. And when we tell them, these are just little Linux servers or BSD or Android devices with often pretty close to the same amount of power, capabilities, service support, protocol support. A lot of them are running undocumented SSH with default passwords and all sorts of crazy things. And they're all over. So visibility is a big, big issue. So once you get past that and you're saying, okay, now I know I have 50,000 devices in my organization, what you start finding is a quarter of those are running end-of-life software. 50% of them have default passwords. And the passwords that they do have that aren't default were changed once at the time of installation.
Or can't be changed.
or can't be changed. Yeah, sometimes in the OT devices specifically, they can't be changed. Or they only support like a 4-digit numeric PIN. Or this device supports 25 characters, but not the letter B or a hyphen. We've seen all sorts of, because there's no commonality how that's done. And vulnerability-wise, usually about 50% of the devices have a level 8 on a score of 1 to 10 for a CVSS score, level 8 vulnerability. An additional 18% have a 9 or a 10, so higher critical, which means that you don't really need much skill at all. You really just need to know how to like log in, perhaps over Telnet, with a default password. And we initially started this conversation, I was talking about video cameras and kind of bringing that around. We're in organizations where they have 10,000, 20,000 video cameras, different sizes, shapes, flavors, brands, things like that, but they all pretty much do the same thing. Some do audio, some do video only. It just depends. But the problem when it comes down to operations, and to your point earlier about, the bad guys don't care. So who's running this? Well, we think it's facilities, and facilities says, no, I thought it was network operations because they're on the network. No, that's the security team. No, it's IT. No, we're outsourcing that to a vendor. So it's like the end of Spider-Man where they're all pointing at each other. Who's doing what in the multiverse? So who manages these? And at the end of the day, you've got these devices, these little Linux servers with default passwords, tons of vulnerabilities in them that are being taken over and using to spy on you, to launch ransomware, to do cryptojacking, to move laterally, and all these other malicious things. And again, we don't even know we've got them, let alone how to fix them. And I saw that as one of the biggest issues across CISOs. Over the last few years, even before I joined Phosphorous, I was hearing again and again, we've got these blind spots one, we don't know what we have, and two, when we find them, we don't really have a way to manually fix them. Who's going to go around to 10, 20,000 printers with a paper clip and hold down that reset button or some other archaic way and try to update these? The good thing is, the flip side of this, most enterprise IoT, and we're not talking about your home Roomba vacuum or your Ring doorbell or Alexa. Those are cloud-based managed. The consumer stuff, it's a little bit different. That's a different ball of wax. But the enterprise stuff, most of it, you can go ahead and remotely manage those credentials. You can harden those devices. You can manage the certificates. You can manage the upgrade or downgrade, in some cases, of the firmware on those devices, which means that you can treat them like you've been treating IT assets. And the analogy I like to use is IoT security today is like IT security was back in like 1995, where we didn't have a great inventory. Maybe we had a Visio diagram taped to the wall in our network operations center. Patching was a little bit archaic. Password management was pretty archaic. We were focused on what the banner should say when somebody logs into our network. Don't say welcome, because then the hackers can come right in. It was very simplistic. And that same thing is being applied to IoT today. The problem is the volume and the fact that they're hyper connected with all these different ports and protocols, allowing access to your most sensitive devices, is very, very problematic.
And so you talk about enterprise IoT. So it sounds like there's a market and vendors are enabling their stuff to be managed. So are there options, I guess, for organizations to say, we need these switches, we need these door locks, we need these cameras? Are there options for them that can fit nicely into their overall management scheme?
Yeah, it's a good point you mentioned too, because no CISO says, I want yet another console that I have to log into and work with. So the best solutions, and quite frankly, the way that we try to operate is, being very API friendly. So for example, if a company does come in and they do some discovery and they find out they do have 50,000 devices across different network gear, as well as all their wireless access points, and then all their IoT stuff, their UPS, their racks, their KVM switches, voice over IP phones, which generally measure in the tens and tens of thousands, printers, so on and so forth. They say, well, it's great if I have a tool that can discover that, but I also need to be able to remediate it. I want to fix those passwords. I want to update the firmware. I want to be able to do that. Okay, that's great. But I also don't want to have to look at this separate console all the time, because I have all these other tools already that I need to feed in. So can you integrate with the ServiceNow for ticketing? Can you integrate with a Splunk for the log management? Can you integrate with my source solutions, or maybe my privilege access management tools like CyberArk and things of that nature for the backend, for the actual password storage? And the answer has to be yes, yes, yes to all of that. If you're going to invest in an enterprise IoT security platform today, and there's a few different flavors out there, one of the things that you absolutely positively need to have is to make sure that all those API connections, all those hooks are there. So you can do reporting from the same solution that you use for your IT reports. So you can understand your vulnerability stats and measure those with all your other metrics from one centralized console. So all your ticketing and logging, everything is centralized in the same way. So that's a really important capability. And the other thing is, you don't want to approach it from, the old days of IoT in the old days, 5 years ago, was let's set up a VLAN. Let's try to set every single IoT device we have on a VLAN, because we have no way to keep these devices safe. And what I like to say is that's great. You can put things behind VLANs. VLANs are great. I don't think there's a problem with that. They can be expensive and they can be difficult to manage and they can be difficult to scale for sure. But at the end of the day, you're not fixing the problem. It's like I cut my left hand and it's bleeding all over. Instead of going to the hospital, I stick a sandwich bag on there and wrap it up with duct tape. Well, I'm no longer getting blood on my right hand, so that's good. But I still have a bloody hand in a bag over here, so I'm not fixing it. And that's the problem with VLANs. You still have a system with bad or default passwords, running all these extra clear text protocols, and it's got Bluetooth low energy, and it's got Zigbee on, and it's got wired and wireless, and old end-of-life firmware from a decade ago, like Ubuntu 10 or something like that. And it's still broken. But you're just going to say, I'm going to kind of push it over here and hope it doesn't It doesn't impact anything. We would never do that in the IT world, at least not today. But we've found that that's kind of the approach that we have to take. And that, again, spilled over to the network devices, some of the OT devices as well. Instead of fixing it, because we didn't think there was a way to fix it at scale historically, we just tried to hide it behind these VLANs for a while. So that approach doesn't work. And then
What
again,
does? Because I was actually going to ask you about that.
Yeah.
There's going to be legacy stuff. I mean, there's going to be a device in a hospital that saves people's lives. There's no alternative for it that's managed securely.
Yeah.
They're going to keep that on, right? So VLANs help, as you point out. But what are the options then if the choice is to not save lives or keep that device off the network?
Yeah, well, the honest to goodness, there's sort of a new kid in town in the security space. They're called enterprise IoT security platforms, and there's a few different variants and ways to approach that. But their whole approach to this space is to say, I want to be able to discover your devices, whether it's an MRI device or it's a PLC controlling a turbine, a multi-million-dollar turbine, or it's a door lock, and I need to be able to discover those safely. And there's a term I want to use here called interrogation. So the idea of scanning these devices is completely gone. So nothing against Rapid7 or Qualys or Tenable, all great solutions for what they do. But you can't do that in this world because it will take it down, especially in the OT world. You say, is anybody in OT, oh, you're going to scan if you use the word scan, it's already a done conversation. But if you can interrogate, what I mean by interrogate, I like to say, think of Star Wars with C-3PO. He could talk a million different languages. There was a scene in the first Star Wars where, they need somebody that can speak the binary language of water evaporators or something of that nature. All these IoT devices that can be managed across the network, whether it's an MRI device or whatnot, they have a way that they want to communicate, whether it's through a web interface or SSH or some type of proprietary solution. On the OT side, it's Modbus and DNP3 and other specific protocols that they want to talk. If you can speak to them in their protocols, you're thus minimizing the risk of knocking that machine over. And you need to be able to interrogate and talk to those devices in an unauthenticated or authenticated way. Of course, with the authenticated means you get more information potentially. So you can get all the way down to serial number, firmware number, modelware number, all the different aspects of that system that you would never get by sniffing traffic or doing a port scan or vulnerability scan, etc. Now, when doing that interrogation, you find out, oh, it's firmware ABC123. You automatically know what CVEs firmware ABC123 patch 7, for example, has. So you don't need to scan for vulnerabilities. So you simply interrogate and you grab all that information. That's critical because now if you want to go to the next step, which I think is the more important step, once I've done discovery, I know empirically with 100% accuracy, this thing is this thing and this is what it does. And it's on version 7 of the firmware and version 10 is the latest one. I can go ahead and upgrade that remotely and upgrade that across multiple devices or a single device or a device in building 1 or devices in North America. It can be very detailed based on that. And have a notion that says, in addition to that, because I have all the metadata, I know that I can go right from version 7 to 10, or my upgrade path has to go 7, then 8, then 9, then 10. And I always thought that was really cool. That was really essential to do this, is to have that deep knowledge that you can only get from those enterprise platforms. But then what I found with a customer, and this happened to be a large financial, they had to downgrade a bunch of their firmware. We don't usually talk about downgrades. I was like, really, what's the use case there? And it made perfect sense. So if we think of headline grabbing attacks like Log4j, for example, stuff that everyone's talking about them. So every hacker in the world is going on to Shodan and trying to find devices that might be running that, and then going ahead and scanning and looking for these vulnerabilities. We know you're going to get impacted. They say, wow, we have devices that number in the tens of thousands that have Log4j. And let's say, for example, they're on version 5 of their firmware, and the vendor knows. But a lot of these vendors that make IoT devices, they're not necessarily technology companies the way we think of technologies. Sometimes they're physical security companies or agricultural companies or something kind of outside this space. So they don't really follow a security development lifecycle at SDLC. There's a lot of shared libraries. There's a lot of white labeling, things that are cobbled together. So a vulnerability that's on a phone also shows up on a router, also shows up on a printer, because of all that shared infrastructure and a lack of testing. So that's kind of a little deep, dark secret in this space. So they're like, oh, the vendor's going to have a patch, but that patch isn't going to be available for 3 months. Well, we don't have 3 days because the internet's being bombarded. So I want to actually downgrade my devices to the previous version that is known not to have that log4j vulnerability. And we make a business decision to say, okay, what we're going to lose from the downgrade, is that going to be more impactful from, a potential hit? And let's go ahead and do the downgrade. So because they can do it easily, it's, point and click essentially, they can go ahead and push that out. Without an enterprise IoT security platform, you're talking about going to thousands or tens of thousands of devices and manually changing that, which means you'll never do it because it doesn't scale, simply not tenable, so it doesn't get done. So the solution is either have an automated approach or don't fix it at all. And that's kind of where we are. And that's the reality of it because of the sheer scale of IoT devices. So without great automation, without interrogation that gives you that level of accuracy, you simply can't get on to remediation and all the things that come after that. It's simply impossible. And then the coolest part that I think CISOs, it really resonates with them the most is, okay, I've discovered my devices. Great. I fixed the passwords. I've hardened it. I'm managing the certificates. I fixed the firmware. Wonderful. But now I still have 50,000 devices and I know stuff's going to break. I know someone's going to stick a paperclip in something and reset it because they had to reboot it, or something's going to happen, or it's going to get hacked. How do I manage by exception? And that goes back to the SIM days. I've got 50,000 devices, but I need to get an alert or a ticket or a log or something that's going to tell me, out of your 50,000 devices, these are the 5 that look suspicious today because it was in version 7 of the firmware. Now it's in version 3. It did have a good password. Now the password's back to default. It wasn't running clear text protocols, but now it is. So now I know exactly what it is that I have to take a look at because there might have been an issue. And that ability to manage by exception kind of equals scale when it comes to IoT. And that seems to be sort of this resounding across CISOs, because their whole thing is, how do I get my hands around this in an automated way that actually lets me move forward? And that, we'll call it environmental drift monitoring, if you will, to see if something's drifted from a known good state to an unknown or a possibly known bad state. That's really the key to the problem, if I can manage that way. And that seems to be a big deal. And that's what CISOs are seeing, is actually saving them time and allowing them to move on to the next step.
Yep. Exception management, incident handling. I mean, we could talk for hours and days on this, and many different paths. I think we looked at this from a vector in and lateral movement. I'm sure there are tons of conversations around data privacy on these. You mentioned spying, but data privacy on the devices, the metadata they create, the databases they access, the cloud they sit in or they connect to. Loads of the denial of service we didn't really get into, but there's so many paths. Every
attack that can happen in IT can happen via IoT or OT or for your network gear. It's and here's the interesting thing. We're actually seeing now specific malware and SSH client server tunnels, like DropBear, etc., being compiled specifically to run on the Linux variants that are doing that persistence for evading that detection. And like one of the simplest examples we saw, we were working with a branch of the military, and they had all of these printers. And I say all of these, thousands of printers. I think it was somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000. So big, but not huge in this specific agency. And they had noticed that there was a lot of activity from these devices outbound, and they picked it up through Splunk. So kudos to Splunk for saying, hey, there's a lot of weird log activity. And it's all over ICMP, because ICMP is kind of outbound allowed ping and things like that for network testing. And as most of us know in the security space, if you want to exfiltrate data from a device, ICMP is a great way to do it. You have to take big packets and chop them into little packets, and it takes a little bit longer, and there's more traffic because there's more packets going across the network, but it's a great way to kind of hide. But what had happened is some attackers had compromised some laptops. That's kind of what the scenario was seen. They moved laterally to get onto these printers. Most of these printers had never been updated. Some of them were running firmware that was over a decade old. They installed hacker tools, which quite honestly, I think were just some basic scanners and tools for doing the ICMP exfiltration. Most enterprise printers have about a 20 to 40 gig hard drive. Not small, not big, but pretty good if you're doing some data theft. They were using these to attack Active Directory systems, databases, servers, anything that they could get their hands on, pulling that data down, chopping it up, and spitting it out. And because it was over ICMP, it wasn't being detected at all for quite a while. And this had actually gone on for about 3 months before they said, okay, these Splunk logs are something that we should really pay attention to. And these were just printers. And when they found a couple printers that were compromised, out of their roughly 2,000 printers that they had, about half their printers had actually been compromised. Not because somebody had to really hack them, because they were running default passwords in many cases, or they had level 10 vulnerabilities that just allowed easy access with minimal effort for an attacker to actually hack it, which doesn't really require any hacking, to go ahead and steal that data. It was right under their noses. It was on these printers. And the bad guys love to target printers. Printers and cameras are probably the two biggest ones because everyone's got them. Nobody fixes them. As long as the printer's printing and the camera's, recording what it needs to record, people don't pay a lot of attention to them. And the bad guys know that. They're building tools specifically to target these devices. And again, the lateral movement to exfiltrate the sensitive data, it's probably one of the main use cases we're seeing now. It's not locking it up for ransomware. It's not, just a denial of service attack or to add it to a bot. We still see those for sure. But most attacks now are all about that lateral movement and that data exfil. So,
a great example, and I'm sure there are millions more. And the question I have, and I suspect many of the folks listening might have it as well. It's almost impossible to know all the scenarios and to be alerted to that. And certainly there's this thing called threat intelligence, and we could share that threat intelligence and be part of ISALs and ISACs, and that's all useful. But above and beyond that, you're not going to hear the story of we need to downgrade these devices because of Log4j.
Yeah.
Right. In a CTI feed. Yeah. That comes from a community that connects with each other and can say, hey, this is what I'm seeing. This is how it's impacting my organization. This is how I'm responding. May not be right for you, but this is how I'm viewing it. And perhaps that starts a conversation in the community to say, that's great. I would do this slightly differently. So maybe talk to me a little bit about, I know you're part of the Blue Lava community. Why?
Yeah.
And how does that play a role here?
Community is so critical now, just like it was, well, it still is today, of course, on the IT side. But again, I have that analogy back to, IoT security today is like 1995 IT security, when there were some communities and it started to get some momentum. But sharing this information, being able to talk with your peers, being able to understand these use cases and these lessons learned. We've shared a handful today, some examples that are public, some that probably haven't been shared publicly. But because the breadth and depth of this IoT term is so massive. We've got Internet of Battlefield things, industrial Internet of Things, Internet of Healthcare things, smart ships, smart buildings, smart cities, all the network gear, all these kind of groups, all these areas are expanding rapidly. And in fact, smart cities and smart buildings is probably one of the most rapidly growing sectors. And smart ships, and if you're not in this industry, you don't think about it a lot, but there's like four major, there's many, but there's four major shipping companies worldwide. All four have been hit with extremely aggressive attacks targeting the IoT and control systems on those ships. All four in large scale attacks. The same thing is happening with cities. The same thing is happening with internet health systems, as well as the battlefield things, so on and so forth. So you have all these little groups, and they're all learning lessons, and sometimes they're communicating internally as well. But I can't stress enough the need for community. I mean, I'm sitting here, sharing my experiences. Mark Weatherford, who I know very well and that you spoke to earlier, talking about supply chain. Of course, he's got federal experience. He's got state government, being the CISO for California and then later Colorado. All of us kind of bring in our own shared experiences. None of us are experts in every area. And because of that, we need to be able to share our information. And it's sort of like going to a doctor. If you go to see a heart doctor, a cardiologist, and you say, "Hey, I've got a problem," well, they're going to default to think, "Oh, it must be related to the heart," but maybe it has something to do with your right foot. Who knows? But it's their training, their experience, their backgrounds. You talk to me about something, and I might say, "Oh, let's look at the IoT side." Mark might be the supply chain side. So if we take all our disparate experiences and we kind of push those together, and the use cases and the lessons learned and the ROI equations and all these other things that we care about, we can learn so much from each other and so much more effectively than we would trying to do it just by ourselves. There's a famous quote, and I forget who said it, and I'm going to paraphrase it, but essentially, we're not going to live long enough to make all the mistakes by ourselves, so we better learn from others, right?
And you're saying we're not going to live long enough to patch all our IoT devices.
We're not going to live long enough. Oh God, isn't that the truth? I'm going to run out of paper clips. So that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited about the Blue Lava community. It's bringing a group of people together, like myself, not just to share, but hopefully to begin a dialogue with everybody else that's listening and start these conversations and help change people's minds if need be. And I'm always willing to learn. I mean, heck, I've been in cybersecurity for 25 years, and I know one thing: if I'm doing the same thing twice, I'm probably doing it wrong the second time. So we have to keep on reinventing ourselves. And man, if we have the community to do that with, it can make a big difference. And we're all in cybersecurity, not because it's boring and not because it's easy, because it is exciting and it is a challenge and it's always changing. And it's better to be part of a team. It's better to be part of a community when you're doing something like this, which is kind of one of the really exciting things I think about Blue Lava.
Yep, I wholeheartedly agree. And as a host of these and many other conversations, my primary goal is to get people to think.
Right.
And from there, hopefully, they'll be inspired to learn and ultimately take some action. And I guess really ultimately give back to the community as well. So however they move through that process, hopefully they'll share their insights as well. So Brian, it's been a great conversation. I want to maybe very short response, an action your peers can take in the next week or two or in the next few weeks, to really get a sense of what's going on with IoT. What's some advice you can give them?
Yeah, I would, if you were the person responsible, ask yourself or maybe somebody on your team or an adjacent team, kind of ask them what the state of your IoT is. Do you have an idea of what IoT devices you even have? And two, do you understand what's their current security state? Are they running default passwords? Are they vulnerable? Do they have end-of-life firmware? And if you don't know these questions, and not assumption-based, but actually evidence-based, you actually have evidence about this information, is it an acceptable level of risk for you to continue going that way? And if it's not, I would suggest take a look. There's other vendors out there. I'm not here to push Phosphorous or anything like that, but take a look at the enterprise IoT security platforms. They're the new kids in town. They're going to help you discover those devices and probably most importantly, help you remediate the risks on those devices. And then as we talked about before, allow you to manage by exception once you get those devices fixed. And if you're not in that state today, you might be in a situation where you have, again, 50,000 devices out there that are all backdoors into your environment, frankly, many of which might already have been compromised. And as we saw with the report by Mandia about Quiet Exit, in some of these cases, they were exfiltrating data for a year and a half. Nobody needs to be in that situation anymore. We've got tools. There's people in the community here through Blue Lava that you can talk to and learn more about this. There's help available. So take a census, figure out what you've got, what's the state of the state as it relates to a security posture. And if it's not where you think it needs to be, it's probably time to take some action. Because I guarantee you, the bad guys, they're already taking action.
Yep. Great advice, Ryan. And I appreciate all the stories you brought to bear today. And I think the ultimate for me is start the conversation, right? Reach out to Brian if you're listening, you have questions. There are others in the community that I'm sure have experience in discovering and detecting and mitigating and responding to IoT issues. And that's what the community's for. So thanks everybody for listening to and watching this episode, and hope to see you again soon in the Lava community.
Thanks everyone. Thanks, Sean.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the LavaCom podcast. If you learned something new and this podcast made you think, then share itspmagazine.com with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our podcast channels. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.